Have you ever felt like the world has conspired against you, stripping away everything you hold dear in the blink of an eye? One moment, your life is full of joy and purpose, and the next, you're left clutching at the shards of what once was. I know that pain. I've lived it. It wasn't just the kind of pain that lingers in your chest. It was the kind that consumes your entire being, leaving you hollow and questioning the very meaning of existence. I was a man who once had everything: a loving family, wealth beyond measure, and the respect of my community. My home echoed with laughter, my field stretched as far as the eye could see, and my faith was my compass. I thought my life was unshakable, built on a foundation of gratitude and devotion. But life, as I've come to understand, is unpredictable, and even the strongest foundations can crumble under the weight of despair. When the storms came, they didn't arrive in whispers, they roared. One by one, messengers brought news that shattered my world. My wealth, the symbol of my hard work, was stolen by ruthless hands. The animals that grazed peacefully in my fields were consumed by unrelenting flames. And worst of all, a great wind swept through, collapsing the house where my children were gathered. In an instant, their laughter was silenced forever. I stood there, paralyzed, the weight of each loss pressing down on me like a crushing tide. The emptiness was deafening. My hands, once strong and steady, now trembled as I tore my robes in anguish. I cried out, not to be heard by anyone, but because the pain needed to escape somehow. And yet, the world didn't pause for my grief. The sun still rose, the wind still blew, and I was left alone, stripped bare, staring into the void. How does one endure such loss? How does one move forward when the very essence of life has been stolen away? My heart ached with questions, but the answers felt as distant as the stars. This is not just my story, it is the story of anyone who has ever felt the sharp sting of loss, the suffocating grip of despair. And yet, somewhere in the depths of this darkness, a faint light began to flicker. This is the journey of finding that light, even when it feels like there's none to be found. I remember a time when my life was full of blessings, a time when happiness seemed to flow effortlessly, like a gentle stream through a lush valley. My days began with the sounds of nature, the bleating of sheep, the distant rumble of oxen, and the soft rustle of the wind as it carried the scent of ripening fields. These were not just symbols of wealth, they were the fruits of years of hard work, the rewards of a life dedicated to diligence and integrity. But my greatest joy, my most precious treasure, was my family. I had 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, each of them the light of my life. They filled my home with laughter, their voices weaving melodies of joy and hope. We would gather together for meals, a sprawling family united by love and shared moments. My sons hosted feasts in their homes, inviting their siblings to join in celebration. Watching them enjoy life was my greatest pride, a testament to the harmony and unity we had cultivated as a family. Every morning, before the sun rose too high, I performed rituals of gratitude and devotion. I would rise early, offering sacrifices to God on behalf of my children. Not because I doubted them, but because I loved them so fiercely that I wanted to protect them in every possible way. Perhaps they had erred in their hearts. Perhaps they had spoken words they shouldn't have. I wanted to ensure their lives remained shielded by divine grace. My faith was my anchor, the foundation upon which I built not just my own life, but the lives of those I loved most dearly. In the community, I was respected, a man others turned to for counsel and guidance. People saw me as someone who had been blessed abundantly, not just in material wealth, but in wisdom and moral standing. It was a role I cherished, a way to extend the blessings I had received to others around me. My fields stretched far and wide, my livestock multiplied year after year, and my servants were loyal and hardworking. But none of these things defined my happiness. My joy came from the quiet, unspoken moments, the smile of a child, the peace of a well-tended home, the knowledge that my family was safe and whole. Looking back, I realized how perfect it all seemed, how much I took for granted the simple beauty of a life filled with love, laughter, and purpose. It was a life of abundance, one that felt so secure, so eternal, that I never imagined it could all be taken away. But life, as I would soon learn, has a way of humbling even the most blessed of us. It began like any other day, calm, ordinary, and predictable. The sun rose over the horizon, casting its golden rays on the fields that stretched endlessly before me. I remember feeling a deep sense of gratitude as I walked through my land, listening to the familiar sounds of life that surrounded me. It was a day like so many others, yet by its end, everything I held dear would be ripped away. The first blow came suddenly. A messenger arrived, his face pale with fear and exhaustion. "Master," he gasped, "the Sabaeans attacked. They took your oxen and donkeys and killed all your servants. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you." I stood there, stunned, barely processing his words when another messenger came rushing in. His clothes were singed, his eyes wide with terror. "Master," he cried, "fire fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants. I alone survived to bring you this news." I felt a weight settle over my chest, an ominous heaviness I couldn't shake. Before I could fully grasp the devastation, a third messenger appeared, his voice trembling. "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties," he said, "and they stole your camels and slaughtered your servants. I was the only one to escape." Each word felt like a dagger to my heart. My livelihood, my security, everything I had worked so hard to build was crumbling before my eyes. Yet, nothing could prepare me for the final blow, the one that would shatter me completely. A fourth messenger arrived, his face ashen, his steps hesitant. He looked at me with sorrow so deep that I already knew this news would be unbearable. "Master," he whispered, "your sons and daughters were feasting at your eldest son's house when a mighty wind swept in from the desert. It struck the house and it collapsed on them. They are all gone. I alone survived." The world seemed to blur around me. My legs gave out, and I fell to the ground, my cries tearing through the air. My children, my beautiful, beloved children, were gone. Their laughter, their smiles, their very presence had been stolen from me in an instant. The pain was too vast, too incomprehensible. How could life, which once seemed so full and abundant, become so empty so quickly? I tore my robe, the fabric ripping like the pieces of my broken heart. I shaved my head in grief, a physical act to match the desolation I felt within. I fell to the ground, my face pressed against the dirt, and cried out in anguish. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." But even as I spoke those words, my heart wrestled with the weight of my loss. The days that followed were a blur of pain and emptiness. I sat among the ashes, surrounded by silence. The fields that once teemed with life were now barren. My home, once filled with laughter, stood eerily quiet. My soul felt like a dry and desolate land, parched and yearning for relief. Yet, the blows didn't stop there. My body, which had once been strong and healthy, was struck with a terrible disease. Painful sores covered me from head to toe, each one a cruel reminder of how far I had fallen. I sat among the ashes, scraping my wounds with a shard of broken pottery, seeking some form of relief, no matter how small. Even my wife, my partner in life, turned to me with despair. "Do you still hold on to your integrity?" she asked bitterly. "Curse God and die." Her words, though spoken in pain, pierced me deeply. I looked at her and replied, "You are speaking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" The loneliness was suffocating. Friends who heard of my suffering came, but when they saw me, they barely recognized the man I had become. They sat with me in silence for 7 days, too overwhelmed by my pain to speak. But their silence was a mirror to my own despair. I, too, had no words. In those moments, I questioned everything I had ever believed. Why would a God I served so faithfully allow such suffering? Was this punishment? A test? Or was it something far beyond my understanding? My heart was heavy with questions, but no answers came. I was broken in body, mind, and spirit. My days of abundance felt like a distant dream, overshadowed by the darkness of my new reality. I had lost everything: my wealth, my health, my family, and perhaps even my hope. Yet, somewhere deep within me, a faint ember of faith flickered. It was small, fragile, but it was there, refusing to be extinguished. As I sat in the ashes of what once was my life, I found myself grappling with a pain that went far deeper than physical suffering. My body was ravaged by sores, my heart shattered by loss, but it was my spirit that bore the heaviest weight. The world I had known and trusted no longer made sense. My faith, once an unshakable foundation, now felt fragile under the weight of unanswered questions. For days, I sat in silence, trying to make sense of it all. I searched my soul, asking myself over and over, what have I done to deserve this? Have I wronged God in some way? Was there a moment when I failed him without realizing it? These questions circled in my mind like vultures, each one tearing away at my sense of purpose and meaning. Then, my friends came. At first, their presence brought a glimmer of comfort. They had traveled from afar to sit with me in my pain. For 7 days and 7 nights, they said nothing, simply mourning alongside me. Their silent solidarity was a balm to my wounded spirit. But when the silence broke, so too did their compassion. One by one, they began to speak, and their words felt like daggers. "Job," said Eliphaz, "you must have done something wrong. God would not punish you unless you had sinned. Seek his forgiveness, and perhaps he will restore you." Bildad chimed in, his tone sharp and unforgiving. "Your children? They brought this upon themselves. They must have sinned, and this is the result. You should repent, Job, for it is clear that God's justice is at work here." And Zophar, the harshest of them all, accused me outright. "How dare you claim innocence before God? Surely you are not as righteous as you think. If you truly feared God, you would not be in this state." Their words struck me like blows to an already broken man. I had welcomed them as friends, but their accusations felt like betrayal. They assumed my suffering was proof of my guilt, that I must have deserved everything that had happened to me. They could not fathom a world where the righteous suffer without cause, and their limited understanding of God's justice only deepened my anguish. I tried to defend myself, to speak the truth of my innocence. "I have done nothing to deserve this." I cried. "I have lived a life of integrity, fearing God and turning away from evil. My hands are clean, my heart is pure. And yet, here I am, surrounded by loss and pain. Do you truly believe this is justice?" But my words fell on deaf ears. They continued to argue, to insist that I must be at fault. Their voices grew louder, drowning out my cries for understanding. And with each accusation, my spirit grew more weary, more isolated. The loneliness was unbearable. I felt abandoned, not only by my friends, but also by God. I had always believed that my faith would shield me from such suffering, that God would protect those who were righteous and upright. But now, in the face of this unimaginable pain, I couldn't help but feel as though God had turned his face away from me. Still, something deep within me refused to let go of my faith. It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but it was there. I clung to it desperately, even as I cried out in frustration and anger. "Why, God?" I asked again and again. "Why have you allowed this to happen? What have I done to deserve this? Speak to me, show me your face." Yet, no answer came, only silence. My friends' accusations continued, their words echoing in my mind long after they had been spoken. But despite their certainty, I could not accept their conclusions. I knew my heart, and I knew that I had done nothing to provoke God's wrath. And so, my spirit wavered between doubt and faith, between despair and hope. I felt lost, as though I were wandering through a vast wilderness with no guide, no direction. But even in that wilderness, I held on to one thing, the belief that God was still there, somewhere, even if I couldn't see him. And though I couldn't understand his ways, I hoped, against all odds, that he had not abandoned me entirely. After days of silence, frustration, and anguish, I finally cried out to God. I could no longer contain the storm within me. My voice, hoarse from weeping, carried all the questions, all the anger, and all the desperation that had built up inside. "Why, God?" I shouted into the void. "Why have you allowed this to happen to me? I have been faithful to you. I have walked in your ways, turned from evil, and honored you with my life. And yet, here I am, broken, abandoned, humiliated. What wrong have I done to deserve this? Speak to me, Lord, and show me my offense." The silence that followed was deafening. I had demanded answers, yet none came. The heavens remained quiet, and I was left to wrestle with the weight of my questions. Did God hear me? Did he care? Or had he turned away from me entirely? And then, in the midst of my despair, it happened. The sky darkened, and the wind began to howl. A storm gathered with a force I could not comprehend. And out of that storm, I heard a voice unlike any I had ever heard before. It was powerful and commanding, yet it resonated with a profound depth that cut straight to my soul. "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge?" the voice thundered. "Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." I trembled. This was the moment I had longed for and feared. God had come to speak, but his words were not the answers I had expected. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" he asked. "Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy?" I was speechless. The questions kept coming, each one revealing the vastness of God's power and the limits of my understanding. "Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? Tell me if you know all this." I felt smaller with every word he spoke. My complaints, my demands for answers, seemed so insignificant in the face of the Creator who had shaped the universe with his hands. "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth?" I could not reply. How could I? What was I, a mere man, to question the wisdom of the Almighty? Finally, I spoke, my voice barely a whisper. "I am unworthy. How can I reply to you?" I put my hand over my mouth. "I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more." But God was not finished. His voice continued, challenging me further. "Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? Do you have an arm like mine, and can your voice thunder like mine?" And then he showed me the might of his creation, the strength of the behemoth, the majesty of the Leviathan. He described creatures so powerful, so fearsome, that no human could control them. Yet they were but a small part of his works. In that moment, I realized the depth of my arrogance. I had dared to question the one who holds the universe in his hands, the one whose wisdom and power are beyond comprehension. "I know that you can do all things," I finally said, tears streaming down my face. "No purpose of yours can be thwarted." Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." The storm began to quiet, and with it my spirit. God had not given me the answers I had sought, but he had given me something far greater, a glimpse of his glory, a reminder of his sovereignty, and the assurance that even in my suffering, he was there. "I know that you can do all things," I finally said, tears streaming down my face. "No purpose of yours can be thwarted." Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." The storm began to quiet, and with it my spirit. God had not given me the answers I had sought, but he had given me something far greater, a glimpse of his glory, a reminder of his sovereignty, and the assurance that even in my suffering, he was there. God, in his mercy, did not leave me in the ashes of my despair. Slowly, piece by piece, he rebuilt my life. My health returned, and the sores that had once covered my body healed. My strength, which had been sapped by pain and grief, was restored. Friends and family who had once distanced themselves came back, offering comfort and kindness. And then came blessings beyond anything I could have imagined. My fields were filled with livestock once more, but this time they were greater in number than before. I had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. My wealth was doubled, but it was no longer the source of my identity. Instead, it was a symbol of God's grace, a reminder that He gives and takes according to His perfect plan. Most precious of all, I was blessed with a new family. I had 7 more sons and 3 more daughters, each as beautiful and beloved as the children I had lost. My heart, though forever carrying the memory of my first children, found joy once again in the laughter and love of my new family. Through it all, I carried the lessons I had learned in the midst of my suffering. 1. Humility. I had believed that my understanding of God's ways was complete, but I learned that His wisdom is infinite, and I am but a small part of His grand design. 2. Faith in the unknown. Even when the answers to my pain seemed out of reach, I realized that trusting in God's goodness was enough. His presence is a constant, even in the darkest times. 3. Compassion for others. Having experienced the depths of suffering, I now understood the importance of showing kindness and patience to those who are hurting. In the end, my life was not defined by the suffering I endured, but by the faith that carried me through it. The God who allowed me to face trials was the same God who restored my soul and my life. He had not abandoned me. He had refined me, teaching me to trust in His unfailing love. As I looked out over the blessings of my later years, I knew one thing to be true: life is fragile, unpredictable, and often filled with pain. But with faith, even the deepest wounds can heal, and even the darkest days can lead to new beginnings. Looking back on my journey, I see a life that was broken and rebuilt, a heart that was shattered but healed through faith. My suffering was immense, my questions were many, but through it all, God never left me. He may not have answered me in the way I expected, but He gave me something far greater, a glimpse of His power, His purpose, and His presence. I've learned that life is not about having all the answers. It's about trusting in the one who holds those answers, even when we cannot understand. Pain is a part of this life, but it does not have to define us. What defines us is how we choose to walk through it, whether we cling to hope or let despair take over. To anyone facing their own trials, remember this: you are not alone. Even in the silence, even in the suffering, God is there. Trust that your story is not over and that brighter days are ahead. If my story has resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can encourage and uplift one another. And if you found value in this message, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, hope, and inspiration. Remember, the storms of life will pass, but the lessons they leave behind will guide us forever. Thank you for being part of this journey. May you find hope, healing, and peace.